Hello, my name is Charles Anthony Silvestri, and I'm recording this message for you from my home in Lawrence, Kansas. Today, I would like to speak with you about the marriage of words and music that are so unique in the choral art form. First, I'd like to thank my good friend Eric Whitacre and the team behind Virtual Choir 6 for inviting me to be part of this video series. We are so blessed to be living, in my opinion, in a golden age of choral music. There are more choirs than ever before. The value of choir is as well known now than it has ever been. There are more composers now than ever before. There are more female composers and more composers of color whose music is being performed more than at any time in the history of our genre. And these are all very, very good things. Now, we all know what makes choir special for us, why we joined, why we are inspired to participate in even a virtual choir. But what makes choir as a genre special? We know why it's special for us, but why is it as a genre special? What distinguishes choir from other ensembles, a string orchestra, for example, or a wind symphony? Well, the one thing that distinguishes choir from those other ensembles, those other types of performance, is text. Choirs get to perform text, a combination of the heart of a poet, the inspiration of a composer, the performance of the director and the singers bringing that message to an audience. That is a very, very powerful thing. And that's what choir gets to do that no other ensemble gets to do. So what I want to talk to you about today is that interplay between text and music and interpretation. When those three elements of choral music come together, and when all three are coming together in the right way, there is a transformative process that occurs, a kind of apotheosis, a sorcery, as it were, where the choir is able to ensorcel the audience that draws them in and communicates an important message to them. And I want to sort of break that process down for you a little bit. Why are singers up there on the risers in the first place? What are they doing up there? What do they hope to accomplish? Right now, again, we all know why we're there. Choir brings us great joy. Singing in a choir can be spiritually fulfilling, it can be renewing, it can be transformative for us as the singers, as the performers. But we already know all of that. There are multiple layers of things going on in a choral performance. After the whole rehearsal process has happened and what's going on the stage, there are multiple layers. First of all, there are skills that the singers are demonstrating. They're learning these skills in the rehearsal process, and they're demonstrating those skills in the concert. The list is huge. They include skills like listening to one another, breathing together, anticipating and adapting to what they're hearing around them, adjusting their tone accordingly, blending with one another. What they're learning, the skills that they're learning, are basically learning how to be together in a community, how to work together for a greater purpose. I would also argue that choirs also teach, singing in choir also teaches character disciplines and values, character qualities that singers learn and demonstrate when they are singing. Again, this list is huge, but a couple of highlights from the list: obedience and fellowship and self-awareness, discipline, investment in a process greater than themselves, trust of one another and of themselves and their own abilities, empathy, collaboration, vulnerability. These are vastly important character qualities, and the studies, so many studies demonstrate the benefits of singing in a choir together, not the least of which are the intangible, unteachable in other disciplines sort of character values that you learn when you're in an arts environment. But what is the ultimate purpose of singing in a choir? What is the mission of a choir? Why is choir even a thing? Well, I've already hinted that it's text that a choir gets to communicate that no other ensemble gets to communicate. And so I would argue that the ultimate mission of a choral singer and of a choir as an ensemble is transformation. It is healing. It is inspiration. I used the word sorcery before. There is an effect that a choir can have on a member of the audience or on the entire audience or everyone in the room that can be magical, that can be transformative, that can manifest new things into the world. A transcendent experience, as it were. I call this mission, this purpose of choir, I call it angelia. That is to say, the act of being an angel. Angels are messengers. They communicate divine truth to people, and that is actually what a choir is doing. Their singers are fulfilling that role, that angelic role. Whenever I speak with a choir, I always make sure that I talk about the audience, the people who've come to hear the concert, or in this case, the many millions of people who are going to click on this virtual choir and listen to it and see your faces and hear your voices. Every member of that audience is going to bring to the concert, or their experience of listening to you sing, every member of the audience is going to bring baggage, is going to bring history and fears and hopes and dreams and emotions with them to the concert. And you never know what those members of the audience are bringing with them, and you don't know what they need. And so there's something in the concert, there's something in every piece that you sing in a concert, or in the case of this virtual choir 6, there's something in this piece that every person who clicks on this video is going to need to hear. And they might not know what they need to hear, and you certainly don't know what it is that they need to hear. But there's something in your performance that is going to be profound and transformative in the life of a person in the audience. Let me give you a couple of examples. There might be someone in the audience at a concert, or someone watching this video at home, who has just lost their job, and they are troubled by that and worried about their future. So they're bringing that anxiety with them to the concert. There might be someone in the concert who has just lost their mother, and they're feeling sorrow and grief and that sense of loss. There might be someone in the concert who hasn't spoken to their son or daughter in 20 years, and they're feeling guilt or shame. They're carrying around that burden with them when they come into the concert. There might be someone in the concert who is about to propose to their beloved, and they've got the ring in their pocket, and they're excited, and they're bringing that emotion of anticipation and happy anxiety to the concert. There might be someone listening to the video who is considering a career in music and is kind of waffling about the practicality versus what their heart is telling them to do. And so there could be something definitely transformative in the performance for that person. The bottom line is, you never know who is going to be in the audience and what message they're going to need from the piece of music that you're singing. But what choir can do that no other ensemble can do is communicate text. And so it is something in the text that will speak to a member of the audience. And so I would argue, as the lyricist can argue this, I would argue that the words of a choral piece are the more important part of the partnership. Certainly in the creation of the work, but I would also argue in the performance of the work, in the preparation and performance. The text really is the reason for this being a choral piece. If the composer didn't want to set the text, they would have written a string quartet. They would have written a piece for wind symphony. But no, they chose choir, and they chose choir because there's text involved. And so if the choir is not going to focus their energy and attention on communicating that text, on figuring out what the text means, figuring out what it means to them, figuring out what it might mean to a potential audience member, then why bother? Then sing a vocalese. There are strategies that I would advocate for a singer, and directors can use these too in their rehearsal techniques, but there's strategies for singers to internalize text, thinking ever mindful of their role as an angel in this process, their sacred responsibility to communicate that text to audience members. There are several strategies that you can do. First of all, I would encourage singers to read and understand the text as a poem first, separate from the music. Now that might involve taking out and typing it for yourself or writing it out on a piece of paper separate from the sheet music so that you can study the text simply as a poem. Once you do that, once you separate it out from its musical context, you can begin to discover what is the human truth that the poet wanted to include, wanted to communicate in that poem. Every poem has some human truth, some observation about the world or about humanity that the poet wants to communicate in very precise or what shall I say, intentional language. I'll be giving a talk in another video about the intentionality of being a lyric poet. But every poem has this human truth included in it. So think about that, read the poem, try to identify what that human truth is, and then put yourself in the perspective of the audience. Who might need to hear or learn this human truth? What sort of person or what sort of circumstance might it resonate with? What parts of the poem are the most meaningful? Where's the quote-unquote money part of the poem? What is that line or that set of lines that communicate that message most clearly and most directly? And finally, what's your personal connection with this poem? What part of it speaks to you? What part of it speaks to your experience? That helps that process of empathy so that if you can put yourself in the mindset of an audience member or a person at home listening to the video of the virtual choir, or any choral performance, you'll be able to find that message that you might be able to communicate to someone. So you've taken the poem out of the context of the music and you've studied it as a poem. You've identified its truths, you've identified whom it might speak to and in what circumstances it might speak to them. And then you've also tried to internalize it a little bit. How does that poem speak to you? And then we want to put the poem back in the context of the music. So now study how the composer has set that poem. Identify the places where the composer's music matches the meaning of the text. There might be words that the composer painted. There might be sections that are darker or brighter in tone or in color, depending on the meaning of the poem. So identify those places where the music and the poetry dance together in a way that you've identified in the poem as parts that are danceable in the poem. And then also identify places in the music where there doesn't seem to be that connection. And maybe it's in those places where your emotionality of your performance can do the heavy lifting. The composer does most of the heavy lifting, but there might be some places where you actually need to do that work. As you go through, identify where all the natural accents of spoken speech, of the spoken poem would be. And I would encourage you to interpret rather than always stress the downbeat or so on. Yes, you have to do what the music says, but rather than always doing what the music says, make sure that you're also always doing what the poet has said to do as well. And so it needs to sing as a speakable, understandable chunk so that the audience can understand what you're talking about. As you rehearse, as you prepare the piece, internalize what you're doing. I encourage singers to feel the connection between the words and the music, to incorporate movement in their performance, to direct themselves in order to get the lilt and the cadence of the speech, the dance, as I said, between the words and the music, to internalize that into their body by actually incorporating some dance. This is safer in rehearsal, of course, than in performance. But if you've internalized it in your rehearsal process, then you will remember that. There will be kind of a residual body memory in your performance, and you'll be able to carry the same emotion through. If the text you're singing is not in English, that's not the case for this virtual choir performance, but if the text is not in English, I would encourage you to write the translation into your score so that you know exactly what you're singing when you're singing it, rather than abstracting the English translation and trying to keep it in a bubble in your brain while you're singing in a different language. And if you do identify conflicts between the music and the text, as the lyricist, humbly, I would argue, let the text win. Because ultimately, your mission is not to communicate the composer's music. Your mission as a chorister is to communicate the poet's poem. That's why you're a choir. That's why the composer chose you as his instrument or her instrument rather than a string orchestra or a band. Now, all these techniques and strategies, all of this is to encourage you as singers to manifest your transformative role as an angel, the bearer of an important message to someone in the audience. You don't know the recipient of your message, and you don't even know what message it is that you are communicating. But if you understand the poem that you're singing, if you marry the poem with the music and study the interplay between the words and the music, and you internalize that in your own emotional life, then you can perform that music with an authenticity, with an emotional, empathetic, ensorcelled authenticity, which will then have a transformative effect on the audience. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I'll be with you again to talk about the nitty-gritty of how to write a lyric poem, and then to take your questions, and I look forward to that. In the meantime, you can check more out about me on my website, or you can find me on your favorite social media platform, and I would love to be in touch with you and to learn more about you. And I look forward to uploading my video to the virtual choir.